Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everybody. I really want to thank the organizers of this webinar to talk about a crucial topic, diabetic macular edema, the current practice. I'd like to also recognize the presence of my teachers. Some of my teachers are listening, and some of my colleagues in the Vitreoretinal Society of Nigeria, my colleagues, and my residents. I know that at the end of this topic, I would like us to discuss, not just listening to the lecture. I want us to rub minds, how to improve the management of our patients. Thank you very much. So I'm having a little problem about okay. So if you look at the diabetes situation in Nigeria, we know that in Nigeria now, the United Nations estimates that the population of Nigeria is about 193.3 million. That was as of 2017. And in the meta-analysis, poor diabetic prevalence in Nigeria was put at 5.77. And this suggests that 1 out of every 17 adults are living with the disease in Nigeria. Now, if you look at diabetes in Nigeria, looking at the geopolitical zones, the highest prevalence was noted in the South-South zone, 9.8%, while the least was in the Northwest. So let's take note of these factors because it's very important to our discussion. Now, the risks for diabetes in Nigeria include all the above listed, but unhealthy dietary habits is a recurrent problem because of urbanization, changes in the way we live. We know that about 8.8% was attributed to unhealthy dietary habits. Other factors like cigarette smoking, physical inactivity, urban dwelling, and family history are also very important. Now, diabetic macular edema in Nigeria, in the Nigerian Blindness Survey, 19 out of 52 diabetes, which is about 36.5%. You can see that it's really much were diagnosed to have diabetic macular edema. So it's a big problem in our environment. Now, what do you mean by diabetic macular edema? When people say diabetic macular edema, because we need to be on the same page. Diabetic macular edema, there's a lot of definitions given, depending on what you are using to define it. Retinal thickening within 1 disc diameter of fovea with exudates, usually people agree on that to be diabetic macular edema. But the ETDRS also gave us for focal edema, the clinically significant macular edema, in which you have swelling within 500 micron of the center of the fovea, or you have exudates that has swelling, or a large swelling about this area, any part of which is being 1 disc diameter of the center. So that is for focal edema. How about the issue of center involving or non-center involving, the OCT era? Because we attribute that to affect vision directly, whether it's involving the center or not. So it's very important. But that will be difficult without optical coherence tomography. Focal or diffuse in the era of FFA, we want to know whether it's localized in one area or it is throughout the posterior pole, or it could be cystoid or serous. Again, OCT will help us to distinguish those serous detachment that may not be obvious to the naked eye. Subclinical, we said that are not clinically significant. It may not be center involving. We said they are subclinical macular edema. But we cannot be sure that it's not involving the center until you do OCT. And there are some we call persistent. That is, you have given treatment, but there is no resolution. You say that is persistent diabetic macular edema. Before we come to the issue of recurrence, now you have treated, patient is better, now the edema is coming back. So all these definitions, you really have to be sure of what you are defining when you are defining them. Now, diabetic macular edema, the clinically significant macular edema. Looking at these pictures, you know that there is swelling and adexudate within 500 to the center of fovea. All these are clinically significant. If it's outside the 500 micron, you know it's clinically non-significant. or is not center involving. That is important. Now, it could be diffuse. So the previous one we described is focal edema. But when we say diffuse macular edema, it's a problem with generalized vasodilatation and leakage involving the entire macular area, the posterior pole. As you can see in this fundus photograph, you see ad exudate all over. But when you do FFA, you see that there is diffuse leakage of dye. Then in this case, we say this is diffuse macular edema. So what we are saying is that the type of edema is important when you are diagnosing and when you are treating. Now, when you say macular detachment, you are thinking of using optical coherence tomography. When you do fundoscopy, you may have an idea there's a swelling, there's an elevation in the macula. But OCT is definite in telling you there's a detachment of the macular area and there's fluid under the macula. So knowing the type of diabetic macular edema is very important to manage. Cystoid macular edema in diabetes is also important to know. When you do fundoscopy, you may not be sure, but you may see cysts. But when you do FFA, OCT, is definite. You can see this honeycomb appearance and say, oh, this is cystoid macular edema. Because the type of management you are going to give to cystoid is different from what you are going to give for focal, and is different from what you are going to do for foveal detachment. Very important. Another important diabetic macular edema now with the OCT era is the one associated with macular traction. Now, there is a mechanical aspect and there's also the tissue aspect. So as you can see, the traction on the macula and there is edema. Now, there is a mechanical aspect and there's also the hypoxic state that is taking place there. When we're talking about management, we'll discuss further on this. Now, so what are the pathophysiology of diabetic macular edema? I'm going to discuss 2 or 3 theories. The first one is the oxygen theory. That means there's reduced perfusion. This is what we know already for diabetes, reduced perfusion. And this will lead to autoregulation and what we call vasodilatation. Now, when you have autoregulation, there's vasodilatation in order to supply oxygen to the area. And there is increased hydrostatic pressure in the capillary. This is what we call the Posseus laws. If you remember our physics and the physiology, Posseus law say that when you have autoregulation and vasodilatation, you have increased hydrostatic pressure in the capillaries. And this is what leads to leakage. Vascular damage from the ischemia can also produce release of VEGF, okay? And this is called vasodilatation. And once you have vasodilatation, vascular damage, there is outflow of fluid and ions. And this is what's called the Stalin's law. Again, you know, this law must be obeyed. When you have vasodilatation and there is increased hydrostatic pressure and there is vascular damage, of course, fluid, ions, macromolecules, lipids will flow out of the vessel. And that's what's responsible for macular edema. We've talked about the vascular endothelial growth factor as the final pathway because the vascular endothelial growth factor stimulates what we call increased vascular permeability. And this is as a result of dissolution of the junctions between the cells. And this is very crucial in the development of diabetic macular edema. So vascular endothelial growth is usually the common pathway of diabetic macular edema. Let's talk about inflammation, because that's another area we are looking into now in the management of diabetic macular edema. There is release of inflammatory cytokines, retinal endothelial cell intracellular adhesion molecules, CD18, induce inflammation, resulting again retinal vascular permeability. And once you see this, compromise of blood-retinal barrier leads to leakage of plasma constituent in the surrounding retina. So inflammation is another important theory. Now, it is not just ischemia, VEGF. Now we have inflammation, because we all know now that not all patients will respond to antivascular endothelial growth factor. You give antivascular endothelial growth, they are not responding. So we should be thinking of inflammatory pathway, how we are going to do that. When we talk about management, we'll discuss fully on that. Now, another important aspect is diagnosing accurately diabetic macular edema. To diagnose, history is very important. Now, our patient that comes to us in the clinic, history of poor systemic glucose control. You can actually get this out from honest patients. Some patient will tell you, doctor, I'm sure my sugar is not well controlled. Okay? So when you now say, what test have you done? They can bring out the result of urinalysis, lipid test, UNU, creatinine, and all other systemic factors that will let you know the risk that the patient that is sitting before you is having. Now, you can also do, some people will say, if I do direct ophthalmoscopy, I will see hard exudate, but we know direct ophthalmoscopy will give a poor yield. You can see lipid exudate, but the stereoscopic view that you have with the slit lamp by microscopy is absent in direct ophthalmoscopy. You may see lipid when you do direct ophthalmoscopy. It may suggest edema, but it's not reliable. You may have lipid without edema, and you have edema without lipid. So direct ophthalmoscopy will always give a poor yield, but it can suggest. Now, slit lamp by microscopy, clinical standard that we must all learn to perform on all our diabetic patients. Because that stereoscopic view, especially when the media is clear, you'll be able to say for sure there is a diabetic macular edema. You can diagnose focal edema, and you can diagnose diffuse edema by your 78 or 90D exam. That is the standard in the pre-OCT era. Nowadays, most people are doing OCT. What you cannot see, you quickly take the patient to OCT and you see. But let's be cautious here, because there are some situations in which OCT may not show us, especially the functional studies, things like stereos, when you want to know whether there is ischemia in the retina. Ordinary OCT that we have around may not show us ischemia. They may show edema or even thinning of the macular area, but they may not show ischemia. But with the OCT angiography that is coming up now, we know that we can diagnose macular ischemia, because ischemia is a very important aspect that we must bear in mind when we are treating diabetic macular edema. So OCT, like we are saying, is critical in the management of diabetic macular edema. It is reproducible, and the central subfoveal mean thickness is what we should be concerned about when we are looking at OCT picture. Okay, that is easily correlate with visual loss and visual function, and you can use that to monitor progress when you start treatment. Very important. So OCT angiography, non-invasive now, and the software is available, and you can upgrade your OCT, and that is very, very important, and may replace the FFA that we are used to eventually. Now, fundus photograph and FFA for diabetic maculopathy. So I've discussed that the fundus photograph will document, you can use for patient education. You can tell them, look at your eye, this is what is there. Okay, the patient will appreciate your line of management when you show them pictures. Very important. So, and again, we stress the importance of diffuse macular edema that you can see with fluorescein angiography, and ischemic episode that you can also see. Now, optical coherence tomography scan, like we have mentioned, will be able to help you classify. Is this central involving? It is not. Is it cystoid? Is it foveal detachment? And that is very important aspect of when you are treating the patient. Now, what are you looking for in OCT? Very important, because at this point, what are those factors that you look at for when you see an OCT in a patient with diabetic macular edema? Not just the thickness of the macula, but you look at the arrangement, as you can see in this picture, all these layers of the retina, the disorganization of the inner retina, lack of boundaries between ganglion and inner plexiform or nuclear layer. You see this is the inner plexiform. This is the ganglion cell layer. So if the boundary, this boundary is not very visible, okay, or the boundary between this and the inner nucleus is not visible, then you know there's disorganization. And this is associated with worse visual acuity. And this kind of patient will poorly respond to treatment. So you can prognosticate by looking at the OCT that, oh, this patient is going to improve with your treatment. Another bad part that you need to know is the disruption of the ellipsoid area. This ellipsoid area is the internal limiting membrane. Now, we know that the fovea, the inner retinal layers are not present in the center of the fovea. As you can see here, the inner retina is from this area to this area, but you know they are absent here. So we only have outer retina layer in the fovea. So if there is disruption of this ellipsoid and the external limiting membrane is associated with worse visual acuity and worse VA. So once you see this patient, this kind of patient, you need to educate your patient rather than just talking about the thickness of the fovea. Thickness is important, but also look at the arrangement and the disorganization of this area, layers. Very, very important. Now, OCT angiography. I mentioned that OCT angiography now is something that we can do in our environment because it is non-invasive. The issue of fluorescein angiography, very invasive, and some patients can react very bad to it. So, the advantage of OCT angiography is its ability to produce three-dimensional view of the retinal capillary network. Now, FFA will show you just a plain one-dimensional view. But OCT angiography can give you three-dimensional view. There is what we call the superficial capillary plexus, which is the capillary network in the ganglion cell layer, on the nerve fiber layer. That is the superficial one that you see. That's the inner capillary plexus that you see. Deep capillary plexus that consists of capillary network in the inner nuclear layer, you can also see. And you can also see the choriocapillary slab. These are very important, and it can tell you the layers of the retina that is involved. And in LDIs, a higher density of vasculature is observed in a deeper compared to the superficial layer. And in diabetes, this is what you see. Now, the picture A and B show fundus photo and the fundus fluorescein angiography. And you can see this one-dimensional view. You can appreciate the microaneurysm as those white hyperfluorescent spots. But also, C and D is OCT angiography. Also non-invasive. It correlates with fluorescein angiography. And here you can see details of the superficial capillary network here. And you can see the deep capillary network. And in deep capillary network, you can actually appreciate the microaneurysm too that are circled here. And you can see microvascular abnormalities that are also there. So, and you can see the enlargement of fovea avascular zone. So all these things are also possible with the OCT angiography. So very important, and I know it may take over the role of fundus fluorescein angiography in future. Let's take note of that. So how can we treat diabetic macular edema? Of course, the standard of care is to control the systemic disease, glycemic control, optimal blood pressure control, control anemia, nephropathy, lipids, and all this control can actually lead to reduced macular thickness. Very important. So that the specific treatment you are going to give to the macula will work better. So it is important for us as we are controlling the eye or the macular edema, we are also controlling the system. Very important. Now, laser. What's the role of laser in all this we are talking about? 20 years ago, laser is number one. But you know, the paradigm has shifted. The early treatment diabetic retinopathy study set the guidelines for treatment using laser because it reduced the risk of moderate visual loss by 50%. What are the current indications now for laser? Because laser is no longer, in some cases, the first line of treatment, but we need to be specific on the role of laser. Focal edema not involving the center of fovea with good visual acuity is better you use laser. If it's focal, you can identify the microaneurysm that is leaking and is outside the center of the fovea, outside the 500 micron, or with not involving the center of the fovea. Then you can put laser. Poor response to anti-VEGF, or when the anti-VEGF is contraindicated. There are situations in pregnancy, for instance, the first trimester, you will not want to give anti-VEGF for those kind of patients. So laser, if there is a focal edema, put laser for them. Or patients in which you have systemic comorbidities that we have contraindication to VEGF, we use laser. When follow-up is a concern, there are situations like in our environment, you see patients that have diabetic macular edema. They are considering giving anti-VEGF, but this kind of patient is unreliable. not the kind of patient that you will see regularly. Follow-up is a concern, so consider laser, especially if the focal edema. Combination with anti-VEGF may limit number of injections. So we know if you combine laser with anti-VEGF, it may limit the number of injections. And nowadays, we are advocating laser. You can reduce the microns, the spot size to 50. Use a less intense laser. You can use yellow laser. Micropulse laser, the so-called subthreshold, usually will not form scar. More treatment, however, is needed. Navigable laser, accurate, fast, but costly. You know, all these lasers are in a way to reduce the complication of the green laser. So you need to consider all this. Steroids, where do we use steroid? Steroid reduce expression of VEGF gene and receptor, reduce leukocyte recruitment, inhibit collagenase induction, reduce vascular permeability, like we have mentioned in the inflammatory theory of diabetic macular edema. Steroid is one of those that will be used to treat diabetic macular edema. Now, the major steroids available, we have intravitreal triamcinolone. When you give intravitreal triamcinolone, the reactions or the response may be immediate, but it doesn't last long. So, and there are a lot of complications with repeated injection, cataract, raised intraocular pressure. So Ozurdex, which was licensed by FDA, is biodegradable. When you inject it, it stays in the vitreous cavity for about 3 months and control the diabetic macular edema. But again, after 3 months, you need to inject. But fluocinolone, that's Iluven, okay, usually can last up to 3 years. Now, when you talk about giving steroid in diabetic macular edema, consider risk of cataract formation, risk of raised intraocular pressure. That is why steroids, now the current indication is when your anti-VEGF therapy has failed. So very important, take note of that. Subtenos triamcinolone. People ask me, what's the role of subtenos? It has no benefit. The DCRM protocol has shown that subtenos triamcinolone has no benefit in management of diabetic macular edema. So the current indication for steroid now is failed anti-VEGF therapy. Then you can use Ozurdex. If you think the patient will need more than 3 months, then you use fluocinolone. Steroid, very important, but you'll be ready and you'll be watching the patient for cataract formation and raised intraocular pressure. Now, laser versus triamcinolone, the diabetic clinical retinopathy clinical research network, protocol B, has shown the advantage of focal orbit laser over triamcinolone. So if you want to use steroid now, I suggest you consider Ozurdex or fluocinolone acetonide. So intravitreal triamcinolone may not be your first choice. So use Ozurdex or fluocinolone acetonide. Now, let's go to anti-VEGF, because now anti-VEGF is the first line for managing diabetic macular edema. Now, the various anti-VEGFs are listed here. Pegaptanib, which blocks VEGF-165, bevacizumab, very popular in our environment, blocks all isoform of VEGF-A. Ranibizumab, antibody fragment, blocks all isoform of VEGF-A. Fission protein aflibercept conbercept blocks VEGF-A, VEGF-B, and PGF. Now, aflibercept, you need to know that is also a systemically formulated aflibercept in a buffer. So it works like aflibercept. It's cheaper, and if it's available, yes, it works quite as well. Now, anti-VEGF prevent visual loss. They improve vision, and they cut the risk of worse visual acuity by 2/3. So this is why anti-VEGF now is the first line in the management of diabetic macular edema. So what are the current indications, just to summarize? Center involving diabetic macular edema. So if it's center involving, use anti-VEGF. Diffuse diabetic macular edema. This will not respond to laser. So use anti-VEGF. So, but we need to start early. So when you diagnose patient early and you start early, you may need fewer injections, and the outcome is usually better. And overall, frequent injection that you have in AMD may not be what you have in DME. What I'm saying in that sense is that you have fewer injections in diabetic macular edema compared to what you have in age-related macular degeneration. Bevacizumab, ranibizumab, and aflibercept show equal efficacy in eye with visual acuity more than 20/40, as you have seen in protocol T. Now, if the visual acuity is less than 20/50 or worse, let me use worse or good or better. If it's worse than 20/50, aflibercept is superior to ranibizumab and bevacizumab in the first 1 year, but superior only to bevacizumab at year 2. So take note. So if a patient is coming with diabetic macular edema and he has a good vision, that is better than 20/40, you can consider bevacizumab, ranibizumab, or aflibercept. The three of them show equal efficacy. But if it's worse vision, aflibercept is superior to the two anti-VEGF. So take note of that. That is in protocol T of the DCRnet. Now, we're all familiar with the issue of laser versus ranibizumab. And from this DCRnet study, we know that anti-VEGF is better than laser and triamcinolone. Take note of that. Aflibercept is also better than laser in the VIVID and VISTA studies, as you can see. So aflibercept is better than laser. So anti-VEGFs have been shown to be better than laser. Aflibercept is better than laser. Laser will stabilize vision. Maybe you get 1 or 2 letters gain, but when you are in the VIVID study, you see that aflibercept, in patients that were treated with aflibercept, they improved by +10 letters, okay, when they give them every month, and +10 letters they give every 2 months, compared to laser, where you just gain 1.2 letters. So in the VISTA, similarly, aflibercept was better than laser. So let's take note of that. Bevacizumab also was found to be better than laser in the both studies. Take note of that. This CRM protocol T that we talked about, that compared the three of them were shown to be equally efficacious, especially in patients with good vision. If the vision is better than 20/40, you know that the three of them, you can decide to use any of the three. But if it's worse vision, consider aflibercept. Now, let's talk about vitrectomy for diabetic macular edema, because that's another important aspect that we must take note of. Now, when there is vitreomacular traction, there is edema, because in diabetes, vitreous increase in cross-linking. There is protein glycation, which leads to bands and traction formation. Adherent vitreous produce loculations. These loculations will lead to hypoxia. Mediators of vascular permeability are released, like VEGF, and there's vasodilatation, and there's leakage, and you have edema. So there are two ways. There are two things happening. You have mechanical factor pulling the center of the macula up, as you can see in this OCT picture. And again, you have the tissue factors, the mediators of vascular dilatation, also because of hypoxia. So it's a two-way thing. So vitreomacular traction may not respond specifically to anti-VEGF alone if you don't relieve the traction. That is the message in this case. So vitrectomy for DME. So your vitrectomy increase intraocular oxygen. It reduces VEGF, open loculations, and remove the traction. So at the same time as you are improving the oxygenation of the eye, you are reducing VEGF, you are also relieving traction. So you are taking care of the tissue factors and the mechanical factors. So vitrectomy, what are the current indications for vitrectomy? Well, that's the next question you should ask me. Persistent diabetic macular edema following failed treatments. You need to do vitrectomy. So if you recognize vitreomacular traction, then vitrectomy should be the way to go, because your anti-VEGF, your laser may not work. For primary treatment for severe DME with poor vision, some people believe, authorities have shown that if you do primary vitrectomy to clear the vitreous, improve oxygenation, even when there is no traction, in patients with severe DME and poor vision, vitrectomy may also help this kind of patient. No benefit, however, for mild edema or with large submacular exudates You say you want to do vitrectomy for that because chronic submacular exudate usually lead to retinal thinning and atrophy and may not improve with your vitrectomy. And mild edema, you don't need vitrectomy to treat that. You may just give anti-VEGF or even laser for that. So let's take note, persistent DME following failed treatment is a candidate for vitrectomy. And the moment you notice vitreomacular attraction, the vitrectomy will remove the mechanical effect. Now, we should not forget the issue of macular ischemia. Macular ischemia may make your treatment to be ineffective if you don't realize it. You think this is just macular edema, you are giving all the treatment, patient is not responding, try and think of macular ischemia. In this case, when you do functional studies like FFA, you see closure of perifoveal capillaries, basement membrane thickening, endothelial damage, increased viscosity of blood, irregular widening of fovea avascular zone. And this is what we have. To see this picture, FFA will show you area of capillary non-perfused area, and you see irregular widening of the fovea avascular zone. So if you are seeing it in your FFA, or even OCT angiography can show this, then you know that it is not, you are not just dealing with macular edema alone. And no amount of anti-VEGF will take care of this. So take note of that, take note. Now, real-world scenarios. Real-world scenarios now. We must remember that not all patients will respond to anti-VEGF. Now, 25% of patients in the RIDE and RIDE studies did not respond to anti-VEGF. 31% in aflibercept, 65.6% in bevacizumab, and 41.5% in ranibizumab did not respond in the protocol T. So you must know that all these studies you are quoting, you must read those studies carefully. Not all our patients will respond to anti-VEGF. Now, and we know the reason why. Some may have ischemia, some may have inflammatory component that may need steroid. So you need to really know that. Now, patient's commitment in RCT is very important. So we should not directly extrapolate what we have in RCT study to our real-world scenarios. Because in RCT, patients, in some of those patients actually are committed to that RCT. So follow-up is regulated because the cost most of the time is taken care of. So, but that is not what we find in real-world scenarios. And we have found out that cost may be, especially when patient is paying out of pocket, they may not honor your monthly visits. And the number of injections is drastically going to reduce. And inferior visual acuity gain is usually what happens. So let's take note of that. And patients with diabetic macular edema also have comorbidities like hypertension, like renal, and they need to visit all those clinics too. So let's take note of that, that we may not be able to reciprocate what we find in randomized controlled trials. Take note of that. So that means we must individualize our treatment, which is the most important. This is the crux of this presentation. We must individualize treatment for diabetic macular edema. Patients who respond strongly to anti-VEGF after 3 injections maintain response for 3 years. This is what we have found in randomized controlled trial. Okay, so patients that respond to 3 injections maintain response for 3 years. So if you are advocating and you are proposing anti-VEGF injection for a patient, educate them. At least let them have the first 3 injections, 3 monthly injections. Then you can determine those that are responders and those that will not respond. Now, delaying treatment usually leads to poor outcome. So when you see patient, don't delay the treatment. This is not the kind of patient you say, oh, your sugar is not controlled, go to your endocrinologist. When it's controlled, then you come back. No, no, sir. By the time the patient represents to you, the vision may be lost irreversibly. So first-line treatment for center involving diabetic macular edema is anti-VEGF. If macula is dry following treatment, you still continue treatment. That means the patient is responding. It's not for you to stop. Continue the treatment. If response is mild, continue or switch to another anti-VEGF, especially aflibercept. So if response is mild response, switch or continue. They may be late responders. Very important. If no response at first treatment, use combination treatment. You've given the injection, they've given the 3 injections, and there is no response. Some people actually say if they don't respond in the first treatment, but in the environment, we give the first 3 injections. If there is no response, then you know this patient may respond to combination treatment. Combine anti-VEGF with steroid and laser. When using steroids, first use Osidex, not triamcinolone. If response is good and long-term treatment is needed, switch to fluocinolone, because we know that Osidex will only work for 3 months. If you use Osidex and you see the patient respond, and you know as you follow up the patient, this patient may need more injection, I think you should just switch over to long-standing fluocinolone that may last for 3 years. So very important point. So what are those other scenarios that we see day to day in our practice? DME pregnancy. If it's the first trimester, we usually advise that laser, especially if there's a focal edema, the first trimester, laser is safer compared to giving anti-VEGF. Because we know anti-VEGF can have systemic manifestation, especially in the unborn child. So usually, you can use laser as first line if it's focal. If it's diffuse, and you may need to discuss with the patient, because steroid injection may be another second line that you may use in diffuse, especially in first trimester. Now, if it's late trimester and it's diffuse, okay, you may use anti-VEGF. But again, by then, the organogenesis will have taken place before the last trimester. But you need to really discuss with the patient and educate your patient very well, okay, before you use. But if you can use laser, laser should always be the first line of treatment in pregnant women. Now, DME with cataract. You have diabetic macular edema and there's cataract. How do you manage? Now, we know that the moment you remove cataract, retinopathy can worsen. So if the cataract is early and the media is clear and the edema is focal, laser is first line. If it's not center involving, but if it's center involving or diffuse, anti-VEGF must be given before your cataract surgery. Now, if the cataract is late and you cannot see, then when you remove the cataract, you must prepare to give either anti-VEGF or laser on the table. Now, for macular edema, anti-VEGF is better because it's difficult to deliver laser to a post-operative patient because the lens that you will use may interfere with the cataract wound. So usually, anti-VEGF is preferred. And that you must prepare for to give on the table the moment the cataract is out and you examine the eye properly and you see diabetic macular edema. Now, in diabetic macular edema with glaucoma, is another challenging case. If it's early glaucoma and it's focal, you use laser. If it's center involving and it's early glaucoma, if you must use anti-VEGF, that means on the table you must perform a paracentesis, and this is in conjunction with the glaucoma specialist to guide you. So you perform paracentesis before you give your injection because you don't want to elevate the intraocular pressure. If it's advanced glaucoma and the diabetic macular edema is focal, then laser is a preferred choice. If it's diffuse diabetic macular edema in advanced glaucoma, you may need to sit your patient down, educate the patient very well because of the risk of wipeout of whatever little island of vision that is left. So this kind of patient, you must perform paracentesis before you give intravitreal injection. And you must do this alongside your glaucoma colleagues. Very important. Now, diabetic macular edema with PDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, is another scenario. Now, if it's early PDR and the diabetic macular edema is focal, focal laser is important. You give the focal laser first and you give your PRP later. But if it is diabetic macular edema with diffuse macular edema with PDR, and PDR is early, you can give anti-VEGF combined with PRP. Now, if it is advanced PDR with fibrovascular proliferation and diffuse macular edema, you may need to take the patient to theater, do vitrectomy, do endo laser there and then, and give anti-VEGF injection. Now, for diabetic macular edema in outreach setting, on very poor patient, you are on outreach and you diagnose diabetic macular edema. It's another challenging scenario. Now, your aim is to ensure patient control the diabetic status. But in the periphery, in the villages, how do you do that? Because this kind of patient, if there is a way you can bring them to the center and give laser. Laser is usually better for patients you cannot follow up adequately. So laser is advocated. In our center, we can also leverage on the fact that we pull patients together to give anti-VEGF. And these poor patients, we can always rob the rich to pay the poor. In our center, we can put them on the list for anti-VEGF injection. And most times when there are a lot of people that are being considered in that injection, then the poor patient may be subsidized. That's very important. Now, how about diabetic macular edema in poorly controlled diabetes? I mentioned this earlier. Patient comes to you and you say, oh, your diabetes is not controlled. Go back to endocrinologist. When it is controlled, you come back for eye treatment. No, sir. What you need to do is to ensure you manage alongside your endocrinologist. If you need to admit the patient, admit the patient. And once they do a tight control, then you can treat the patient. Remember, laser is very important in diabetic macular edema in poorly control because anti-VEGF may be prone to endophthalmitis. So try as much as possible to manage the patient individually. So individualized treatment is very important. So diabetic macular edema in poorly controlled diabetes must be managed alongside the endocrinologist. Don't ask them to go and come back. Now, choice of anti-VEGF. That's another important thing we must know. One dose VAR versus multiple dose VAR. In our environment, one dose VAR is ideal. When the patient can afford it and you explain the pros and cons, so most patients in our environment will tell you, give me the one dose VAR. And you know you can sleep at night. You won't be thinking of endophthalmitis. But multiple dose VAR, what we do in our environment or in our center is make sure you pull patients together. All these high volume centers, in our center now, what we do every 2 weeks, we give anti-VEGF. So what we do, we get the multiple dose VAR for those that cannot afford the one dose VAR, and we put them together. We make sure that VAR is used only on that day, and we discard. We don't stop because of the risk of infection. Very important. And like I said earlier, the rich paying for the poor is also very important. We bring everybody together, we share the money, and the way they pay for it is better for everybody. It's cheaper on the long run. Because cost is very important. Availability is very important. The cold chain is very important. Patient education is the most important. So always educate your patient, the choice. Now, the future. Let's talk about the future of diabetic macular edema management. Type 2 receptor pathway, as you can see in this picture, angiopoietin 2 usually is what we need to block. The Time 2 study said the moment you block angiopoietin 2, you will increase or stabilize the vasculature, and this will prevent leakage. And the faricimab is a novel bispecific antibody that targets both angiopoietin 2 and VEGF-A in the Boulevard study. And we have seen the phase 2 results, and this is even better than ranibizumab in reducing macular edema and improving visual acuity. So we are waiting for the phase 3 result. The issue of permeability genes are also being looked into. If you can identify the genes that increase vascular permeability, you can do something about them. Infliximab, kallikrein kinase system can be inhibited to reduce inflammation. Insulin-like growth factor studies and oral low-dose steroid, Optina, is also in the pipeline. The future, Protocol U, now consider intravitreal dexamethasone combination with anti-VEGF. We know that the results may be favorable. Protocol V, prompt anti-VEGF versus laser, especially in eyes with good vision. Now, we usually see patients with very good vision, 6.669, and we are wondering, are we to give anti-VEGF or laser? Are we to just observe this protocol V? When the result comes out, we'll be able to know what we have to do. But in our environment here, once you see somebody with very good vision and his focal edema and is far away from the center, but it is clinically significant, I think laser will be better than giving injection because of the risk. Protocol W, prompt anti-VEGF for severe NPDR with center involving DME plus poor vision, patient with very poor vision, and they have severe NPDR. So this study, we are actually eagerly awaiting the result. Micropulse use with anti-VEGF combined in LAMENT study is also what we are also looking forward to. Delivery system for anti-VEGF, slow release as we have in steroid, we are eagerly waiting for that too. So screening is what I think in our environment we should be advocating for. It should be a significant part of management of diabetic macular edema. There should be collaboration between family physician and endocrinologists to create awareness among their patients, the use of telemedicine or mobile-based devices. Okay, that is something that is passionate to my heart. As you can see in this picture, you can see what you can do when you use your mobile phone combined with 20 diopter lens. You can screen in the communities and you can actually diagnose diabetic macular edema. Okay, so very important. Let's take screening seriously. Summary: the prevalence of diabetic macular edema is increasing because type 2 DM is increasing. OCT is critical in diagnosis, even in the follow-up of this patient. Systemic control should always be number one. Individualized treatment, okay? That means all the result of the randomized studies we have seen, nevertheless, we must still individualize our treatment. First line is the anti-VEGF. Laser and vitrectomy are now secondary. 3 doses of anti-VEGF usually determine response. When you give 3 doses, you will know those that will respond, and that will determine your next line of action. Steroids for failed anti-VEGF treatment. Combination treatment if steroid fails. And again, screening must be done. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, and I will await your interactions, your contributions, and your questions. Thank you very much. Question and answer. Okay, the first one here. How do we treat those with macular ischemia? Any role for repercussions? I don't know what you mean by repercussion. I hope they can hear me. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes.
I think it's
macular is, yes, any role for reperfusion. Is it reperfusion or repercussion?
Reperfusion, sir.
Oh, okay. Now, macular ischemia is a very sad story. When you see it, patient may not respond to treatment, unfortunately. It's common with patients with type 1 diabetic mellitus. So, unfortunately, you cannot give anti-VEGF, you cannot give laser. Most times, the current available treatment may not work. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Now, there's another question here. The issue of treat and extend. Treat and extend. If I may answer, treat and extend usually was used to reduce the number of injections that are given. Now, when you say treat and extend, what you mean is you see a patient with diabetic macular today, you give anti-VEGF, in a month, you see the patient, the edema has gone, you still give the injection, and you extend the follow-up treatment maybe to 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, the patient comes back, you investigate with OCT, there is no edema, you give the injection again, you keep extending, even if there is no edema, until you extend. But if the edema resurfaces, then you come back to your first 4 weeks weekly visit. Now, treat and extend in this era is something that can be practiced, but we don't, in my own center, I don't practice treat and extend. What we practice is we give those first 3 injections. If the patient responds, then we continue the monthly injection. So that's what because we have known that monthly injection is usually superior to PRN. Now, PRN is another type of injection that you wait until you see the edema before you treat. Okay, so monthly injection in all the studies that we see commonly is what is advocated. All right, next. Okay, there's another question on outreach. What guide should be followed in the outreach settings? Yes, the thing about outreach, I gave a talk briefly on what you do when you say diabetic macular edema in the outreach. It is very difficult to manage because you cannot guarantee follow-up in that setting. So laser is advocated for patients you see in outreach setting. So because it's difficult to convince your patient to come to the hospital, so if you can give laser in the advanced country in Asia, what is done is that there is mobile van that takes laser all to your outreaches. So you can actually deliver your laser in the outreach center. So that is what is done. So laser is better for patients you cannot guarantee follow-up. So let's check for other question and answer. Okay, yes. The question about diabetic macular edema and cataract. Yes, what I said was that if you have diabetic macular edema and early cataract, the vision, the media is clear and it's focal edema, you can give laser. If it is diffuse edema, anti-VEGF can still be given because the media is still clear. But if it's advanced cataract, now you cannot see properly, then you may need to take out the cataract. And when you're on the table, after the cataract is being removed, you must have prepared to give anti-VEGF injection on the table because laser may not be possible immediately after cataract surgery. So that's what I said about cataract and DME. Why the paracentesis in patients with glaucoma? Very important. Now, if you give injection in advanced glaucoma, we mentioned that the intraocular pressure can go up even to as high as 40-50 immediately you have given the injection. So in patients with advanced glaucoma, there is a risk of a wipeout condition. So that's why when a patient has advanced glaucoma and DME and you want to give intravitreal injection, it is safer to give a paracentesis, reduce the pressure before you give your intravitreal injection. Don't do the paracentesis after giving the injection. So it's safer to reduce the pressure before you give the injection. Now, LAPDR and focal DME. Is focal laser applicable alongside PRP? Very important. Now, the issue of LAPDR and focal diabetic macular edema. Yes, you can give, once it's focal means it's one localized area, okay? And LAPDR, you just see new vessels. So you give the focal laser first, not the same sitting as PRP. Again, some authors advocate you do a nasal PRP alongside the focal laser. Then a week or two later, you bring the patient back to complete the PRP. That is LAPRP and focal laser in focal edema. Now, in children with type 1 diabetic mellitus, does the dose of anti-VEGF change from regular doses? Now, I don't have experience with children with DME, but if you can extrapolate what we do in ROP, we usually give half the dose for children, but it depends on the age. When the patient has left the pediatric age group, then you can give adult dose, okay? That is the dose of anti-VEGF. So half the adult dose, there is no convention. It's just like people use half for children, okay? Now, what is termed success when you give anti-VEGF? How soon do you need to wait before maximum response is seen? How available is also there? Very important. Now, the issue of success. Now, from the studies we have seen, By the time you give 3 injections, if there is going to be response, after the 3rd injection, you should see a response. Now, like I said, not all your patients will respond to anti-VEGF. So when you give anti-VEGF, after the 3rd injection, you have to monitor with your OCT. If there's reduction, there's satisfactory reduction, you term that success. But you know that from the studies that we have seen, we see a lot of patients being given injection, 10 injection, 12 injection. Honestly, we don't know when to stop anti-VEGF injection. So that is one honest answer I want to give. How soon do you need to wait before maximum response is seen? Patients respond differently, like we have seen. Some after 3 injections, the macula is dry. Some you need to, because the mechanism of action of the diabetic macular edema is more than one. Some may be inflammatory. So when you give anti-VEGF, the response may be dramatic in some, may be mild in some there'll be no response at all. So that's when you consider other modalities. There's a situation where you give anti-VEGF, there's response, and you continue to give anti-VEGF. If there is no response, you either shift to another anti-VEGF or you add steroid. If steroid is not responding, then you give combination, anti-VEGF, steroid, and laser. Ozurdex, how available is it? I've not seen it, but I know it, you can order for it. Ozurdex. Okay. Then let's go to the next. Are there any peculiarities in treating children with DME? Now, we've talked about the dose of anti-VEGF that in children usually you give the adult dose. Now, usually I don't have experience with treating children, but usually if you extrapolate what we do in ROP, we usually give half the adult dose to children. Thanks for your presentation. Please, how long do you wait after anti-VEGF for center involving edema before laser for PDR if both occur together? Now, this is a very important question. How long do we wait after anti-VEGF for center involving edema before laser? Now, anti-VEGF, I've seen anti-VEGF act within a week or two, so that the moment you give anti-VEGF and you see the response in some patients, so if they're going to respond very well to anti-VEGF, you see it. So you give anti-VEGF and you see response, especially if it's PDR and there's hemorrhage. You give anti-VEGF, within a week, hemorrhage is cleared, and you can do your PRP. Okay? But if it's center involving edema, usually anti-VEGF acts within 4 weeks. And the moment you do that, then you give injection. The reason why you are giving anti-VEGF before the laser, you all know that if you do PRP, PRP can worsen center involving diabetic macular edema. So that is why you give anti-VEGF before. So usually within a month, you must do your PRP. Okay, thank you very much. Let's look at another. Yes. Yes, what is my experience about IOP pattern after intravitreal injection? I know immediately you have given the injection, intraocular pressure goes up. It can be as high as 50. Okay? It can be as high as 50. So usually, when you give anti-VEGF, intraocular pattern is usually in the around the time of giving the injection. So on the table, you can check the intraocular pressure. Okay, if the intraocular pressure is very high, you do a paracentesis. Okay, most patients will definitely survive within a week or two. That's why we see our patient a day after the injection. Okay, and when we see a patient after, we check the intraocular pressure. So usually, the intraocular pressure is usually around the time of injection. So, and the risk is more if the patient has glaucoma or other optic nerve disease. So, always check the intraocular pressure. Now, which is actually better, anti-VEGF or laser when handling macular edema in cataract patients? Now, we have talked about this earlier on. If the media is clear and edema is focal and is not center evolving, laser is better. Let me answer live. Which is better, anti-VEGF or laser when handling DMO? If the cataract is early and you can see the retina and the edema is focal, is not center evolving, laser is better. If it is diffuse or it is center evolving, anti-VEGF is better. If you cannot see very well, clearly, it's better you do your cataract surgery. Prepare to give anti-VEGF on the table immediately after cataract surgery. I think that answered your question. Are there any situation where you stop at one injection only? In diabetes, the question is, are there any situation where you stop at one injection only for diabetes? No, I've never seen it. If you stop, in another 1 month, the fluid will come back. The only situation in ophthalmology that I've seen when you give one single dose of anti-VEGF is in a case of myopic choroidal neovascular membrane. I've seen it done before. I've seen it in my center. Gave one injection and fluid disappeared. Okay, but in diabetic macular edema, because it's an ongoing process, the edema is most likely to come back. So one injection may not work. But if you combine with laser and it's a focal edema, combination treatment may stop the recurrence. Which is actually better, anti-VEGF or laser? When only demo, we already answered that. Sir, can success of treatment be measured using central foveal thickness? If yes, at what value of foveal thickness do we stop giving injection? This question, okay? Sir, let me read the question. Can success be measured using central foveal thickness? If yes, at what value of foveal thickness do we stop? Now, what you need to know is to know your own, in the environment you are in, you know your own normative data. I don't think we have that here in our environment here, okay? So usually the fovea, like I mentioned, what is more important is the average measure, not the direct foveal thickness. The average measure, the average foveal measurement that you measure in multiple areas, okay? Now, in our environment, you tend to use what is less than 200 micron. If you can achieve that, you can say that, yes, the macular thickness is acceptable. But we really need to have our own normative data in this environment. Okay, let's see if there are other questions. Okay. So, any other? I'm still waiting for any other question. Let me thank all the participants for listening in. It's Saturday, and some of you should actually be enjoying your weekend, but you have decided to join us. I think we'll be able to enlighten you, and maybe we're able to help in answering most of the problems. Okay.